You of course can continue experimenting with the nodes and try some different effects around. Things like the lens distortion though are definitely my favorite. But once you do that, what we'll do is we're going to pick a folder and we're going to render it out. To do that, it's quite simple. We're just going to come up here into our output properties. You want to make sure that your resolution is set to the correct settings, 1690 by 1080. And we want to make sure our frame rate is at 24 FPS and our frame range is 1 to 400. Now, the only other thing we want to do or need to do is set our folder destination. This will be where the image sequence is saved. So there, I just made a new folder, and this will be the file type for that. For what we're doing, the 8-bit color depth is fine, and 0% compression should be okay. And once you're ready, you can actually just pull the trigger and render the animation. And this will take some time, about 20 seconds per frame by my count for this compositing settings. Be a bit patient. It's still faster than cycles though. You'll see the previews appearing as they go. I'm going to just pause this video, and once this renders, I'll show you how we can view it using the DJV media player. So I let out about 130 frames render out while I went and had a quick late breakfast, early lunch, and that's where I'm going to stop it for now. I'm going to just use these as a demonstration, and we're going to go into the image exporting and sound editing process. To view what you just exported, this is where the DJV viewer will come in handy, because other methods of viewing images will require you to combine them through an encoder. This, however, will allow you to just watch the sequence as an image sequence. So what you want to do is you want to go to your folder location where you've saved your image sequence out to, and then in DJV, you go to File, Open, and I recommend pasting that in, mostly just because the file browser here is quite archaic. But if you double click, it will pull up a viewer and you can view your scene in action. Now this looks a little strange, mostly because the way I had the scene set up, some of the pieces that would have been in the foreground were now put into the background. So there's some strange parallax effects happening, but for the sake of the demonstration, we're just going to keep them in place. And you can see rapidly how you could experiment with different background and foreground effects in your shots. And of course this is a short sequence because I stopped the render early at frame 136. But once we have this and we're happy with how this looks, if I was one of you guys, I would keep at it. I would keep tweaking it and cleaning up the scene and the shots. But for a base for the demonstration, this is what I'm going to roll with. And it's got the line work from the grease pencil, it's got some Toonshader experimentation here, and a couple of filters in place. But once you have all that stuff rendered out, ideally you'll want to go through and use DJV to preview some shorter sequences before you pull the trigger on the full sequence so you can see what it's going to look like. But once you have that, we're going to go into Adobe Premiere. Adobe Premiere is a really handy tool, and I'm just opening it here from the Creative Cloud, and I'll just start a new project. They have some preset templates for you, but I'm actually just going to create one called the DTS Toon Demo up here in the top left, and I'll hit create, and which is a number of windows. And this is a video editing software, so they have a number of tools specifically dedicated to that. But what we want to do for our purposes is go to File and Import. Here you want to go and navigate to your image sequence folder. You can just select the first image in the sequence, and here where it has a checkbox that says Image Sequence, you can just say Open. And now you want to drag and drop it into the media player. So this is actually your timeline, very similar even to Blender. You can scrub back and forth. Now, you may experience some lag with Adobe Premiere, and it's quite a heavy software where it is keeping a lot of data live on the table. So you may want to actually come up and reduce the preview settings here. So perhaps by default it's at full, which will be giving you a full real-time preview, but as you see it's starting to drop frames. Possibly because I'm screen recording myself and I have Blender open and all these things, but generally when I'm working in Premiere, first thing I'll do is I'll lower the playback resolution. But here you'll be able to preview, albeit at a bit of a lag, your sequence once more, which again is why the DJV player is so useful for previewing. Now, you can use Premiere for a lot of things, and of course, even similar to what we were doing in Blender with some of the effects, you can come up here into the right and you can add effects to your shot. And it's really simple to do this. If, for example, you want to add a different kind of color grading, you can just browse around these different pre-mades and you can just drag and drop it onto your shot. And all of a sudden, we have got some alternative color grading for our scene. And that actually has a pretty interesting additional outline it's added. I'm not even upset about that. I might actually just leave this one on. Why not? Some other things that you can do in Premiere, and probably the most useful thing you can do, is cut with the knife tool. Now, we're not really going to be needing this for our setup because what we've done for you is provided a template file that has the camera path kind of predetermined. But if you want to slice and edit and rearrange your footage, you can use that knife tool, and you could even move those clips around. And so now it's going to cut back and forth. Here where there's a gap, it will cut to black. And just like a normal layering system, it goes from the top to the bottom. So the piece of footage that's on the top will be what is played. So here where they're stacked, for example, you see the footage that is laid on the top. If you want, what you can do is you can change things like the opacity or the blending, and so you could even have them layering on top of each other, for example. Now, this isn't especially useful, and I'm actually going to undo all those changes for our piece here, because since we have just a continuous piece of footage, all the edits we're really going to be doing are just going to be on this continuous piece. Now, some things you may want to experiment with are the keyframing potentials within Premiere. And beyond just adding preset color effects, you can also go and look into video effects, for example. They have a stylized section here. And just as an example of one of these effects in action, you can just drag and drop it onto your footage. If we want to color emboss, you can see it has extremified our color palette quite a lot. And those effects have now been added up here into the effect controls while this clip is selected. If I click off of this, these will disappear in the top left. But if I have it selected, all of the effects that I've added to this clip will be on this list. If I want to decrease the power, you could just turn these numbers to 0, or you could even delete that effect from the list. In a similar way, these lumetri color effects, which I grabbed from the beginning, I can come in here and fine-tune the settings, which are really just color grading settings. If you want to do any more color grading and you're not totally happy with the colors, you can play with that here. Another thing that I'll do sometimes is I will actually Control-C my clip, Control-V, and paste it, and drag and drop it over the other one. Now, what this will allow me to do is I could have effects that are overlaid onto my original. So with this second clip, for example, I might want to add some kind of pixelation. And what we can do is grab an effects from the list. Let's just explore some of these for a moment. I'm just in the effects menu here, and you'll notice that they balloon out rapidly as there's a ton of effects. I'm going to actually just grab the lens distortion, and I'm going to apply it to this top layer. And I, of course, can increase this effect here, but when I do that, it's going to just be applied to the entire length of the footage. What we probably want to do is we'll jump to the beginning of the sequence, and we'll set this to 0. And if we want to keyframe it, we can click this little clock button, which, just like in Blender, it has now added a keyframe to our sequence, which is a little bit hard to see, but here, since this is frame 0, it's got this little diamond here on the first frame. If we want to come up to 2 seconds into the video and increase this vertical decentering, now, because we turned on the animation mode, it is live keyframed that. So that effect will go from not happening to happening, and then it locks itself in. If I want it to go back to normal, though, for the end, what I would do is I would reset this to 0 at this time. And now you'll even see on this little graph, this effect picks up and then goes back down. If I hit play, you'll start to see that effect rolling in, and of course it's a little laggy, just because it's a lot of data. But then it rolls back out. So this may not be exactly what we want, because this white bar here is a little bit jarring. So a couple of ways we could combine this with the original would be to change the opacity of this top layer. So we would be making it slightly transparent so that the two pieces of footage start together, but then they separate. And there's a bit of a pulling apart of the layers. And you could have it then return back to itself at the end. And alternatively, though, we also have the blend modes here, just like in Photoshop. So if we, for example, pick overlay or soft light, we will have that distortion layer softly overlaid as more of a visual effect, while the main scene remains the most prominent piece. Of course, the visuals of this do matter quite a lot, so at a certain point, maybe you could be taking it slightly too far with some of these effects, but I really encourage you to experiment with it. And even just me adding on 2 really simple effects, 1, the color grading, and 2, this distortion effect, I mean, it's already rapidly transformed the entire video into something other. So I really encourage you to play around with some of these different filters and color correction modes. Now, once you have that, we're going to move into sound.